love's a funny word because I could say I love God, but I also love pizza. And we have contaminated some words. We've destroyed their true meaning. Like when we talk about the awesomeness of God, but you'll hear people say, oh, the hamburgers are awesome, right? What it does is it tears at the true meaning of the word. So when you talk to Christians or you talk to non-Christians, and if you were to say to a non-Christian, well, you don't love people, you can't. They'd say, well, you're really weird. Of course I love people. And then this is what we would do as Christians, because we speak Christianese, and we do that to confuse the masses, because there are times when you get a bunch of Christians in a social setting, and if a bunch of non-believers were in the same social setting, they wouldn't have a clue what you're talking about. And we as Christians have got to learn not to be so socially awkward. Because the weird part about it is we can talk about the very things you could talk to those people about. When you're with your Christian brothers and sisters, you can do that. But somehow when you get around believers, you take on this weird, when you're around non-believers, you take on this weird Christianese that like people in the world don't fellowship, they just get together. You see what I'm saying? And so when you say to someone, well, you can't possibly love, they say, well, that's crazy. So then to make us sound super spiritual, we say, well, Jesus has an agape love for us, right? So before you were a Christian, had you ever heard the word agape? No. So you and I understand what it means. And people say this, like, people have laid down their lives for other people that weren't Christians. There are people who have given their lives for other people. And then the Christian will say, well, they did it with selfish motives. And you go, really? What's selfish about killing yourself for somebody else, right? I just think the guy who jumps on the hand grenade to protect the people in his platoon, I don't think he's being selfish. Okay? I don't think he is. And I think what happens is we just forget. We forget how the world sees things, and we isolate ourselves. And listen, have you ever been talking to someone and they say, God is love, right? And they're usually saying that as a excuse for their sinful lifestyle, right? Well, God is love. When somebody asks you or somebody tells you God is love, ask them where they got that. It's in here, right? It's in here. And the same God that's in here that's love has a standard. He has a holy standard that his people are supposed to live by. And what we do is we get lost in the semantics. How about this one? I saw this poster a lot during the campaign. People would hold up signs that says love is love. Did you ever see those people put love is love, right? And so really that's a sign that's basically saying gay marriage, gay lifestyle is okay, because as long as you love people, it's okay. But love can be a very selfish thing. There are people who love to use people. We would all acknowledge that, and we wouldn't say, oh, well, that's good, because it's love. Love is love. If you want to use women, if you want to use men, as long as there's love involved, it's all good. No, you would never say that. And when somebody says God is love, yes, he's love, but he's holy. He's holy. And so because he's holy, he expects us as followers to live different. And so our view of love is very different. The church should have unconditional love, but it doesn't mean they don't have standards. You see what I'm saying? I mean, let's face it. If any of you have children, you know there's been times maybe they had to get stitches, maybe they had to get a tooth pulled, something, and they had to go through that painful process, right? Where they're sticking the needle in to numb the skin or whatever. And the children, they're crying like, Mommy, Daddy, help me. But because you love them, you allow them to experience that pain, because you know when they come out on the other side, it's better. That's true love. And sometimes we think love means not being offensive. But the cross is an offense, right? The cross is an offense. I've told this before, but if you and I shared a duplex and you were on the second story and I was on the bottom story, and I was in my kitchen and I was cooking dinner, and your family had a sun deck that was directly above my kitchen, and as I'm cooking a hamburger, this big grease fire starts, and it just consumes the entire kitchen. So I grab my family and I run outside, and I see you and your family sitting up there, and I know that at any second that floor is going to open up and those flames are going to consume your family. But I say, but it looks like they're having a good time. I don't really want to ruin their Saturday. And that floor opens up and kills them. What kind of person would you say I was? I guarantee you wouldn't say I was loving. Right? And so what we do as Christians and loving the brethren and loving people is different than the world said. You know, there was a guy that said to me one time, young people think love is something that you get, right? That you get from people. My wife and I were talking about the difference between doing something because you love somebody and doing something because you have to. And that's what John is talking about here. We don't keep his commandments to be holy. We don't love the brethren to be holy, right? We don't do these things to be Christians. We do those things because we are Christians. And if you're not doing those things, if those things don't come natural to you, you need to check yourself, right? I mean, that's that. And when it goes, he says a couple of times, the one who remains in love remains in God, and God remains in him. And so, from a biblical perspective, let me tell you what love is. And I'll go to Corinthians, and it's so funny because we say this at weddings all the time, right? There's beautiful wedding pictures, and it has this, and that's good. And it says, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it is not boastful, it is not arrogant, it's not rude, it's not self-seeking, it's not irritable, it does not keep a record of wrong. Love finds no joy in unrighteousness, but rejoice in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hope all things, and endures all things. And so we've really turned that into the wedding verse, right? You see that a lot in weddings. But that's actually a perfect picture of God. God is the consummate fulfillment of all that. That's exactly who God is. So when you think about love, you have to go to this, because I may think love is one thing, you might think love is one thing, but the scriptures tell us what love is. And so why does John have such a heavy emphasis on this? Because it's truth that we're different. And let me tell you something. True love transforms people, right? I have met, and probably so have you, some hard cases, hard people, and love broke them. When they experienced love, they were a very different person. And you just don't know the power of love until you think back into your own life, and think back when you first started on this Christian journey, and think back of your life before you were a Christian, and think where you are now, It's the love of God that transformed you, right? I mean, I don't want to put my wife on the spot, but my wife is an excellent example of love changing people, okay? My wife's lived in those neighborhoods that they make documentaries about, hard neighborhoods. The night that I met my wife, she had got in an argument with a lady and she rammed the lady with her car, okay? No, I'm just being honest, right? And so that's why, no, listen, that's why people say, oh, not Loopy, she's so sweet. Right? No, I'm just being honest. Love changes people. And, you laugh, but you were probably just as rotten. You know how I know that? Because Solomon says when you think about the past, you don't look at it correctly. That's a danger. It's a danger to forget where you came from. I'm not talking to look. I know too many people that their past is like a 300-pound corpse that's chained to their body, and they drag it with them everywhere they go, okay? And they never experience freedom, even though they would say they know they're forgiven. And all of us have things in our past that we're not proud of. But that's all under the blood, right? And so that's why we remain in God, because we know out there is bad news. Okay? And so now, as John is just love, 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 they say that historically at the end of his life that he had to be carried into the church because he was so frail. And the only thing that would come out of his mouth was love one another. That's what came out of his mouth. Can you imagine what it would be like to be in a church where that was the goal? To be in the church, we've talked about it before, where it doesn't matter who's up here. What matters is who's in us. It'd be transforming. And I think when we talk about, this is according to the Southern Baptist Convention, not me. When we talk about the fact that 40% of people don't come back to church after COVID, that's a powerful indictment of the church. But it also shows you that people can attend church for years and not really love the brethren. And I would go as far to say, if you don't love the brethren, you don't love God. Right? How can you? We're his representative. And when you say, oh, I love God, but I can't stand the church, he says right here, the person who does not love his brother and sister who he cannot love, how can he love God he hasn't seen? You know why you can say that? Because you don't have to prove it. It's easy to say things you don't have to prove. Yeah, I love God. God's everything to me. But I don't want to say that about my brothers and sisters because I might be put to the test. If you see your brother and sister in need and you close your eyes to that, how is the love of God in you? That's what the Bible says. So I guess we would have to say, according to the Bible, because we are so wealthy here, there should be no poor Christians. Right? So as Americans, we forget that there are millions of people, literally, that if they could live out of your trash can, would feel like they won the lottery. It's hard to wrap your head around that. It's hard to wrap your head around the fact that 50% of the world has never spoken on a telephone. Wait. Hard to wrap your head around that because we can't imagine life without a telephone. You ever gone out to your driveway and you go, oh, I forgot my phone. And you go back in the house. You know, a long time ago, we didn't do that. Yep. We didn't do that, right? We did this. When he gets there, tell him to call me. We used to do that. Some of you younger people don't remember that. Some of those younger, do you remember when the first two numbers of your phone were letters?
Yep.
Right? Instead, it was like mine was JU4, right? Remember that? And so it seems like we functioned as a society without phones. And I think what John is saying here is, look, let's just focus on what's important. The people that don't come to church, I think they forgot that when you come to Christ, you get Jesus. You get Jesus. You don't get you get Jesus. And I've seen so many people. I tried that Christianity, it didn't work. Like, what does that mean? Christ's sacrifice wasn't sufficient for your sin, because that's what Christianity is. But we preach this life enhancement. And so to me, I think about this maybe more than I should, but I wonder how the early church survived. They didn't have seminars on church growth. They didn't have life enhancement classes because most of the people weren't going to make it through the year. They didn't have the thermometer on the side, so this is how much money you're given this year, right? Because they weren't planning on being here next year, and they grew. And you know why? Because they loved one another. They loved one another. And we're, like I said last week, we're still divided as a country. After the election, nobody switched sides.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, people are digging their heels in. We thought if Trump won, everything would be better. And nothing's changed. And you say, well, hasn't taken office yet. The hearts of men haven't changed. Right? And so here's what you have fallen people in power, and now you have a new group of fallen people in power. That's all you have. Nobody's seeking God. I talked about it this morning at the Bible study. Politicians will always say God, but they'll never say Jesus, because Jesus is the dividing line. When you say God, Muslims are good with that. No, Jehovah's Witness, everybody's cool with that. When you say Jesus is God, now you've driven a line. And so, I guess I know it's like a redundant point about loving people, but here's the thing: we have to love even those people you don't want to love, even the people you don't want to love. And you all have those people in your life, right? They're like when you have a cavity and you can't get to the dentist for a week, and you touch it, and every time you touch it, it hurts. You have those people in your life, right? Every time they come around or you hear their name, it hurts. Don't look at anybody. Don't turn around and look at anybody. And so as I was putting this together, I was thinking, what does that look like? I mean, what can we do? What can Faith Fellowship do so that if somebody walks in that door, they can visually see that these people love one another? I heard one time, I don't know if it's true, but I heard when people are visiting a church, they make their mind up in the first 5 minutes. Before they've heard the worship, before they've heard the sermon, before they've heard anything. Because of the kind of ministry that I've been involved in most of my life, it taught me over the years to be incredibly compassionate, because I recognize that people are broken and people are hurting. So like, if somebody's a dope fiend, the dope is not the problem. The problem is, why do they need to check out? You see what I'm saying? Why do they need to check out? And I remember thinking as a young man, and I'm just being honest, that's why I used to think it was so weird that rich people did drugs. No, I did, right? Because, look, if you live in the hood and you ain't going anywhere and times are tough, I completely understand checking out for a couple hours. But if you're up on top of the hill and everything's paid for, why would you need to check out? Because deep down, people want to be loved. And people want to feel part of something bigger than themselves. That's this. That's this. And so I want to ask you this. You have those people in your life that are difficult, that you don't want to love, that you don't want to forgive, and maybe you have a good reason. You know, maybe they did you dirty. But let me ask you this question. You go home and look in the mirror and think about your life and ask yourself, what reason did God have to love me? See, we're all cool here. We're all cleaned up. So we can put on the front like everything's cool. But go back before Christ. I would say this, some of my greatest sins in my life I've done since I've been a Christian because I knew it was wrong and did it anyway. You see what I'm saying? When I wasn't a Christian and you'd have told me, hey, you know what you're doing is sinful, I'd have said, okay, cool. I wouldn't have given it a second thought, right? Because in my particular lifestyle, I didn't have the illusion of being a good person, right? But I didn't want to be a good person. That, you know, to me, just in my deep theology, so you know, I was a great thinker before Christ. I used to think if you worked a job and didn't kill anybody, you'd probably go to heaven. Right? If you worked a job and you paid your bills, I figured you were a good guy. Because the simple life is so deceiving, right? We look at people and we think they have it all together. They don't. People are broken. People are hurting. So why would God forgive you? What reason did God have to forgive you? There isn't one. Except God so loved the world. So let's wrap our heads around this. And when people say, you know, my God is love and all this stuff, God's serious about sin. You know how I know that? Because he wiped the whole world out once before. If you want to know the truth, if every one of us woke up in hell tomorrow morning and God burned this place to the ground, he'd be perfectly just in doing that. Perfectly just. But he forgave us. You were filthy rags before him. Maybe your filthy rags cost more than the people over here, but they were still filthy rags. So if that's the case, if God loved you in that state, and God forgave you in that state, who are we not to love people? Right? Who are we to say, man, you don't know, that guy's a jerk, I don't love him. Yeah, maybe he is, but maybe because no one's loved him. And if it's not going to be you, if it's not going to be me, who is it going to be? Until I started, when I was counting the love in this verse, I was like, man, this guy's redundant. He repeats himself. You know why that is? Because there's men who read the Bible. And you know why I know that? Because when God calls a man, he says, Saul, Saul, Abraham, Abraham. No, he does. He says the name twice, so they hear. So he's redundant. When something's redundant in the Bible, you should pay attention to it. That means it's a big deal. Right? And so I understand this is kind of weird, kind of like, well, I get it. It's kind of a dry night, and it's kind of like, why are you just talking about love, love, love? Because once I leave this, I'm in a world that half of it hates the other half. And I feel it. I feel it when I'm out there. And I used to tell you before the election, people are on edge, man. That's why people are getting shot over parking spaces. They're still on edge. It's just a different group that's on edge, right? And so we have a responsibility to look to the Son of God who forgave our sins, to be Christ-like, to forgive and to love, and to ask ourselves, or to tell ourselves, those people that you have a hard time with, instead of having a hard time with them, every time they come to mind or they come up, start thanking God that he put them in your lives, because he put them in your life to form and fashion you in his image. If you don't believe me, what do you do with that scripture that says all good things work together? That means those people that just, those people, they're there to form and fashion you. And I promise you, if you cut them out of your lives, God will bring someone just like them. I knew a guy that went to a rehab, and they had a corporate bathroom. And on real big letters in the mirror in the bathroom, it said, "You're looking at the problem." Imagine how I would treat the people that give me a hard time, that I have a hard time with, if I said, "Oh God, you've put them here because you love me. You've put them here because you love me enough to stretch me." Stretching is painful, no? It is. I mean, no, literally, it's like the worst exercise, right? Because when you stretch, it burns. And then you forget to stretch for a day, and everything you did the day before is lost. Stretching is difficult. God stretches you because he's forming and fashioning you to his image. And anything else in your life that keeps you from God, you want it out. It may be a painful extraction, but you know how serious? Remember when Jesus said, if your eye makes you stumble, rip it out of your head. How much would you sell an eye for? How much would you sell 2 eyes for? Your eyes are not for sale, right? They're precious. As we get older, we realize how precious they are. You know that, real quick, let's see if I can find it. Completely unrelated, but it's okay. It's in the book of Ecclesiastes. And Solomon is talking, and it really speaks to us as we age. But if I can't find it, I won't read it. But he talks about, where's it goes? Okay. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, before the days of adversities come and the years approach when you say, "I have no delight in them." Al and I were talking about the pain of aging. That's what this is talking about. That's what this is talking about. Before the sun and the light are darkened. That means you can't see as well. That's what that's talking about. And the moon and the stars and the clouds return after the rain. In other words, your vision's still good or bad. It doesn't matter if the sun's out or not, right? On the day when the guardians of the house tremble and the strong men stoop, that's because the back hurts. That's what that's saying, right? The women who grind grain cease because they are few, and the one who watches through the window seems dimly. The doors of the street on the street are shut, and the sound of the mill fades, but one will rise at the sound of a bird. So in other words, there can be all sorts of noise, but the wrong little noise keeps you up. Right? So let us, and Solomon goes on to say this at the very end. Basically, what Solomon says, the sum of all things is this: seek your Creator while he can be found. So as we love, as we go forward, as we look at John's writings, we recognize that a world that's gone crazy is only going to be restored by the saving grace of Jesus Christ. And you've heard this a million times. People want to know how much you care before they care how much you know. I will tell you something. If people think you love them, they'll let you share your lives with them. And let me close with this. We have a friend, and there's no way to water this down. He's a very violent man in a very, very violent motorcycle club. And his motorcycle club and this other motorcycle club were killing each other on sight. They still are to this day. But we were at a Mexican restaurant, and my wife just shared the gospel with him because she knows he's a prime target. And she lit into him. And he said to her, I remember I was sitting there, he said, the only reason I let you talk to me like that is because I know you love me. True story.